The evil dragon, feared as the leader of the Demon King's army, was just minding his own business when a strange girl suddenly offered herself as a sacrifice, in exchange for the mighty dragon to wipe out the Demon King's forces. The problem? He has no idea what she's talking about. In fact, he doesn't even attack animals, or humans for that matter. Realizing the girl is completely out of her mind but oddly persistent, he accidentally ends up taking her in as his disciple. And just like that, the feared evil dragon finds himself stuck in a chaotic life in magic battlefields he never even cared about. Ryuko, a girl who is currently begging the mighty evil dragon to lend her village his strength in order to defeat the demon lord, in exchange for her life. But there's one small issue: he isn't evil and he's a carnivore. Ryuko thought that he was just being nice as she tried to convince him by putting herself on vegetables to show how tasty she'll be. But the dragon was just thinking about how crazy and delusional this girl is. Attempting to prove he isn't evil and a carnivore, he shows her what he eats on a daily basis. And just as he thought that Ryuko understood him, her ass gone and offered herself on a plate of grass and fruits, which made him outright question her if he's speaking Chinese or something. Which, actually, he is. Ryuko insisted that her village and herself knows about old dragon's full potential.
Cap.
And might, while expressing how determined she is to sacrifice herself to get him to help. Old Dragon, however, kept on thinking of how the heck did these rumors even spread of him since he had been a vegan for the better part of 5 millennia, and not to mention he's scared of fighting anything, even including rabbits. So in reality, he's a vegan on top of being a loser, but still he decided to help Ryuko out despite his limitations in exchange of nothing. What could possibly go wrong after all? As it turned out, everything, since the girl turned out to be an orphan that no one will ever miss if she disappeared the next day. Ryuko went to greater lengths to offer him her soul, but the dragon tells her, just think about how hard it would be to dispose of your remainings. So her solution is that she will dig a hole, which made Old Dragon finally realize how slow Ryuko actually is, and maybe she has a dying kink. However, he also notices that she has a magical aura around her. As such, he decided to play along with being the evil dragon role and letting Ryuko go home. And somehow, Ryuko began to believe that she had become the evil dragon's disciple now that he had consumed her soul. Still, the monster remained considerate enough to take his new disciple back to her village on top of him, while turning a blind eye to how absurd Ryuko's reasoning is. On their way back to the village, Old Dragon was confused to see how rabbits and cats were terrified of his presence, since he's nothing but a vegan dragon. Thinking he would get a warm welcome from the villagers, but well, you can probably guess that wasn't the case.
希望村民能友好地欢迎老夫。老夫就知道。
Just as he thought he'll be taken down with ease by the townsfolks, one of the elderly there approached Old Dragon to see if he wasn't pleased with the sacrifice he got, which scared the elder to death when Old Dragon intimidated him to never send him any more souls. For Old Dragon, he was impressed and relieved by the fact that townsfolks are so foolish that they will believe anything. More importantly for him, however, Old Dragon informed the town that he won't harm them thanks to Ryuko's sacrifice, while promising that he'll keep fighting the Demon Lord in his long-term consideration. Just as he began to feel relieved for scamming the villagers about that last part, he nearly slipped when a tiny rock fell at him.
真不愧是老夫啊！
Before realizing his mistake and getting back to pretend to be your average Elden Ring boss role, which obviously terrified the villagers, except for one blonde boy anime Lai Aod, which for some reason I've been reading his name as Lai Adobe. Anyway, this Adobe guy was furious that Old Dragon had devoured Ryuko's soul, so much that he charged at him with a stick. Just as Old Dragon was terrified of getting beaten by his 12-year-old nemesis, the townsfolk jumped out to prevent Lai from hurting that fraud of a dragon. Still, that didn't stop Lai from being apoplectic, until Ryuko came in to threaten the boy to never be rude to her master ever again. Although this shocked the boy, it made him beg Old Dragon to take his soul instead and return Ryuko's. The elders intervened to shut him up, since they can't afford to lose him as the heir of this village. Lai, however, insisted that Ryuko is too precious to be thought of as a mere sacrifice, pointing out that he would rather have the entire village perish instead of having to sacrifice her. Seeing how awkward the situation had become for him, Old Dragon decided to leave. Before he could take a step back, however, the villagers were notified of a pack of wolves approaching the village from the mountains, which made the fraud terrified, especially when he realized that they had surrounded him. He tried to intimidate him, but the pack pulled an Uno reverse card that made Old Dragon intimidated instead. Just as things were about to look disastrous, Ryuko jumped on top of him, pulling out her dagger and unleashing a massive magical aura before beginning to take down the pack of wolves one by one. As for Old Dragon, he was stunned by the power that Reiko possesses, since it's something that could be seen once in a lifetime of a dragon, especially that she began to call out her very own spells at this point. As such, Old Dragon decided to remain on Reiko's good side, since she seemed scarier than the dark wolves. Again, what could possibly go wrong with that? As it turned out, everything. Before he got to realize that, however, Old Dragon sat with the townsfolks, who were so happy at the defeat of the wolves that they launched a party. Unfortunately, Lai was nowhere to be seen, which made his father beg for forgiveness, but Old Dragon was just a little disappointed, as he just wanted to talk to the kid. After all, he was still impressed by how much he cares for Reiko's well-being. Just as he began to think of telling the whole story to Lai in hope of getting his help, Lai was brought up to him on the ground, as he kept on expressing his hostility towards Old Dragon, who made Reiko do all the nasty work for him instead. Old Dragon didn't care much about that, but Reiko decided to get rid of Lai for disrespecting her master, and she would have done it if Old Dragon didn't stop her. Reiko also revealed that she never was close to Lai in any way, as she believed that Lai was doing everything he can possibly do to expel her from the village, which actually isn't, as Lai was genuinely concerned about her safety that he tried to protect her. Heck, he even got punished for her sake time and again. If it wasn't obvious enough already, then it should definitely be clear to you that Reiko isn't exactly the brightest. But Lai wasn't any smarter either, as he promised that he will save her from the evil dark dragon one day, much to Old Dragon's dismay. Before she could leave with Old Dragon, Reiko decided that it'd be best to do so after taking everything valuable from Lai's place. Although Old Dragon opposed it, Reiko went ahead and stole some clothes that Lai was apparently making for her for a while, which made him glad, as he hoped that it would protect the evil dark dragon. So yes, she accidentally stole her own clothes. Once Reiko was done with her impassioned speech about defeating the Demon Lord and saving her village, she used her magic to spread his wings and head straight to defeat the Demon Lord. There is one problem though, Old Dragon has no wings at all. But Reiko, thinking that his wings shouldn't be used for the sake of her, suddenly just spawns in wings and flies out. Anyway, seeing that he's in a precarious position, Old Dragon decided to ask Reiko to not fight now, since he's still somewhat rusty for some intense tea, opting instead to land in a nearby rebel village to join ranks with them for the big fight. Surprisingly, Reiko agreed to this request, and she looked for the closest village after creating a hell of an odd spell for that purpose. It didn't take her long to figure out where the nearest village was, and after praising it for her fraud of a master, the duo decided to head there immediately, albeit Riziko couldn't stop herself from making an economy class for her master about how taxes works. At least she's doing it better than us.
No. He's got a point.
Once he saw how prosperous the village seemed from above, Old Dragon began to contemplate of a way to leave Reiko there, just so he can get back to his previous chill life. Well, as he approached the city, he noticed that the lights there were not from how prosperous it is, but because it was getting attacked by the armies of the Demon Lord, much to Old Dragon's dismay. To make matters worse, the townsfolk there began to shoot him, as they believed that he's another enemy. Reiko came into the rescue by literally breathing fire onto the arrows and flying monsters of the Demon Lord's army. As they landed, Reiko was understandably furious, since her boss had no intentions to fight humans. As for Old Dragon, calling him out is self-explanatory. Hearing this claim from Reiko, a red-headed girl called Alliant, who's the leader of Paleodona village, came in to apologize to them on behalf of the town's garrison, hoping that she could get the duo to join their ranks against the Demon Lord. An offer that Old Dragon and his disciple couldn't refuse, albeit it took Alliant a little bit of back and forth to convince them. After a brief explanation of the ongoing situation, Alliant asked Old Dragon to eliminate the monsters in the sky. Not wanting his scheme to be exposed, Old Dragon got Reiko to do all the dirty work for him again, portraying it as another chance for her to train. Being the oblivious girl that she is to his scheme, Reiko obliged, and she got to seriously eliminate every bird that came in her way with a menacing smile on her face, so much that Old Dragon himself became even more terrified of her than of the Demon Lord's army. Still, that didn't stop Old Dragon from figuring out how the Demon Lord used to control his army of skeletons on the ground, as he pointed out that it must be from the tallest tower in the village. As for who's the most fit person to take control of the tower and finish off the skeletons in one go, Old Dragon told Alliant that she's the one to do that. Just as Alliant began to order her men to search for what's controlling the skeletons in every remote place in the village, Ryuko came back instantly after successfully carrying out her task. Seeing this, Old Dragon tasked her to get some rest, as he had faith that Alliant and her men would be capable enough of carrying out their task. As the rain was falling, Old Dragon kept on thinking of a way to leave Ryuko in Alliant's care, hoping to go look for the milk, while Ryuko was dreaming of her father covering her in her bed as they were sailing. Once the rain stopped falling, Alliant came in to thank Old Dragon for the order he issued, as it proved useful in finishing the job relatively quickly. While the men went to help in the reconstruction effort, Old Dragon thought it'd be the perfect opportunity to leave Ryuko in Alliant's care. Although Alliant was skeptical of Old Dragon's story about Ryuko being the one to possess all of the magical power, she still decided to think of it more once reconstruction of the town is done. On the other hand, Alliant was also curious to know why Old Dragon is turning his back against the Demon Lord. To which he proceeded in telling her the entire story that led him to this very moment. Except that Alliant didn't believe his story. Instead, she asked Evil Dragon to release Ryuko from the magical aura she's having. Old Dragon refused, claiming that he gave absolutely nothing. For Alliant, meeting a divine child in reality is quite unrealistic, as it never happened with anyone before, let alone herself. However, she recognized that not keeping her in check might get Ryuko to be consumed by her own magic, thus turning her into an actual evil dragon. This came as terrifying news for Old Dragon, especially since he's aware that he's not lying. To make matters worse, Alliant drew her sword as she didn't get any answer to her question for betraying the Demon Lord, especially since she's a loyal swordsman of the Demon Lord himself. Just before she could strike this woken dragon, Ryuko came in just in time to protect him. Although Alliant has a much heavier sword and has a significant edge when it comes to physical strength, Ryuko was even more agile than her counterpart, which made her able to match Alliant move for move. Despite the brave struggle, Alliant managed to eventually overpower Ryuko before turning her attention back to Old Dragon, where he realized that his skin is as tough as your average pillow. Instead of feeling relieved, he was even more terrified that Alliant wouldn't let him die a quick and painless death. As she kept on attacking him, the guards had already figured out that Alliant was actually having fun with Old Dragon and Ryuko. It turned out that Alliant was merely messing with the evil dragon and Ryuko, since neither he nor the young girl was hurt in any way. Alliant also confirmed through this mean joke that Old Dragon wasn't lying about himself being a useless weak deadweight of a dragon. Once Alliant explained her entire scheme to Old Dragon, she proceeded to advise him against publicly pointing out that he's a pathetic and weak deadweight, advising him to be a gigachat instead, since that might affect Ryuko's faith in him and will get even more people after him, if having the second highest bounty on him after the Demon Lord wasn't enough, that is, wishing him a good luck in the end. Just as Old Dragon began to kiss his old life goodbye, Alliant pointed out that Old Dragon should stay by Ryuko's side if he's so concerned about her well-being, informing her that this entire fight was just a dream. After all, Ryuko has a blind faith in everything that comes from Old Dragon. The next morning, Ryuko woke up shocked to the sight of her overlord becoming extremely short like herself. It turned out that Alliant gave Old Dragon some rejuvenating water to make him become smaller, since his size is going to prove problematic. For Ryuko, Old Dragon decided to explain it as if it was something related to his health, which, despite sounding too far-fetched, Ryuko believed it like the ambitious donkey that she is. Relieved with her answer, Old Dragon asked the girl to pack her stuff up so they could get going. Once they got out, Old Dragon noticed that Ryuko was still thinking about how true that dream has felt, which Old Dragon managed to still bluff her once again with relative ease, even though Ryuko threatened to get rid of Alliant if she ever was rude to her master. Speaking of Alliant, she noticed a young boy asking the guards about Ryuko. This boy is none other than Lai, who's met directly with orders to get to work by the guard, as if it was his first day in the guild. Lai wasn't amused by this, as he was chasing the evil dragon, which got Alliant to be interested in hearing the boy out, until suddenly a part of the town's gate was about to crush him into pieces if it wasn't for Alliant's timely interference. Realizing how strong she is, Lai decided to beg Alliant to have him as her disciple, just for the sole purpose of defeating a certain weak dragon that she came across yesterday. Seeing his determination to save his beloved Ryuko, Alliant decided to take him in, by getting him to move a heavy carriage while whipping him like a slave. Seeing that he collapsed, Alliant went ahead to force him to drink some god-forsaken abomination as medicine to recover his energy. Meanwhile, the evil dragon decided to get some rest. Instead of heeding her fraud of a master, Ryuko thought it'd be best to continue, as she believed that old dragon decided to rest for her sake, even though it's for his small legs to recover. To make matters worse, he's been outside of his cave for so long that he didn't even eat. To which Ryuko came in with the promise of making a barbecue with the rabbit nearby. Amidst their argument over what to eat and what not, some thugs came out of the woods to rob Ryuko from her valuables. Old Dragon tried them against the idea, but they remained fixated on robbing him and Ryuko until the thugs began to suddenly fight among each others over the shares of what they'll get from selling Ryuko. Their leader stopped his subordinates, only to begin insulting Old Dragon in front of his disciple. Annoyed by these insults, Old Dragon asked Ryuko to give them just a nudge. Her nudge, however, was a bit of an overkill.
点到为止。
But it was enough to make the gang submit to the great evil dragon and his disciple. Their good behavior would prove to be just a facade, however, as their weird hospitality led Old Dragon to discover that these thugs have been holding captives to sell as slaves. With this scheme being revealed, Old Dragon asked Ryuko to hand these losers to the guards of the nearest village. When asked about why Old Dragon won't be accompanying Ryuko in this task, he responded that it's part of Ryuko's training. Once she was gone, Old Dragon finally erupted in joy since he can finally get to eat grass to his heart's content in one of the caves. His dream came crashing down when he fell inside a hole out of nowhere. When he woke up, he found himself in front of a hostile shadowy monster. In response to that, Old Dragon did what he does best, running away while begging for mercy. Unexpectedly for him, the shadowy figure turned out to not be hostile, as the guy was trying to warn Old Dragon from booby traps in the cave. Heck, he even gave the vegan dragon a bunch of fruits and veggies. While his guest was eating, the shadowy figure detected the presence of a very strong and dangerous individual, which Old Dragon figured out that he's talking about Ryuko. Old Dragon also learned that this guy is actually the god of hunting, who has lost all his treasures and the ability to leave this cave along with it, after humans turned against him once they mastered the skill of hunting, which humans have learned from him. Eventually, the god of hunting became forgotten by mankind, which made him unable to leave unless someone needed to learn how to hunt in the first place. Seeing how miserable this god has become, Old Dragon thought of helping him out by suggesting that he teaches him how to hunt, much to the god's ecstasy. Now that they're finally outside, the god of hunting couldn't help but express his excitement and eagerness to teach Old Dragon how to hunt. The latter, however, wasn't as eager as his host, much to the god's outrage, as he cannot tolerate any delays, promising that he can turn Old Dragon into a credible hunter within 3 hours. Still, Old Dragon couldn't help but admit how much of a failure he is, for failing to learn anything for the past 5,000 years, since he has tried so hard and gone so far, but in the end, it didn't even matter. Still, the god of hunting believed that there's no such thing as a bad disciple, but only a bad master instead. As such, he pulled out a whip.
Hold up, wait a minute. Something ain't right.
While repeating that he'll make sure to turn Old Dragon into a talented hunter in 3 hours. Not to mention, no one has ever not passed his classes. For starters, he wanted to make sure that Old Dragon gets a strong physique, so he tasked the Old Dragon to lie down in preparation for his first exercise. Much to his frustration, Old Dragon wasn't even able to lie on his back. I mean, he failed to see that he's training a dragon, not a human.
老夫好像没有办法逃。
Although this lesson failed, the god of hunting decided to get to the second lesson, which is about physical balance. As such, he ordered Old Dragon to establish that on top of a very weak log. Old Dragon addressed the issue, but the god of hunting insisted that he should carry out with the exercise, only to be shocked that the log broke with Old Dragon halfway on top of it. Despite this failure, the god of failure was still determined to carry on with the training, which kept on failing time and time again, until Old Dragon began to call out Ryuko to save him from this misery. For the record, Ryuko noticed Old Dragon's aura, but thought that it's something to be expected of such a great evil dragon like himself, while remaining oblivious to what's happening with him. All that was happening while the thugs were carrying the carriage with the captives in it and Ryuko atop it. Back to Old Dragon, the god of hunting was growing increasingly frustrated by how his disciple was failing every single test he was going through. Left with no other options, the god of hunting decided to put Old Dragon through a test of avoiding obstacles, where explosions will tear him to pieces if he touches any of the strings set up for him. The god of hunting went to great lengths to set the strings high enough for Old Dragon to get through them. Sounds like Old Dragon has no excuse to fail this time, right? Wrong, because Old Dragon forgot that the water of rejuvenation's effect had worn off, so his body began to expand to its original size, thus exploding the trap. Understandably, the god of hunting was inconsolable for his miserable life, while Old Dragon kept on apologizing for being such a failure. Despite this obvious fact, the god of hunting remained as fixated as always on his doctrine that there's only bad masters and no bad disciples. As such, he decided to lend Old Dragon some power, which he somewhat learned how to use, before the god of hunting concluded that his mission had been accomplished and disappearing into thin air. The next morning, Old Dragon woke up to see that Reiko had arrived after successfully handing over the thugs to prison and setting the captives free. He sure was happy, but he didn't want to bother telling Reiko about it. With that out of the way, Reiko reported that there's a nearby peaceful village called Selianen, which they should protect instead of allowing it to fall under the Demon Lord's forces. Old Dragon, however, opposed this as he didn't want to trouble himself with anything after his spiel with the god of hunting yesterday. Still, that didn't stop Reiko from insisting that they should head to Selianen immediately. After some time of walking, Selianen came into Reiko and her master's view. Although Old Dragon was mesmerized by its beauty from afar, Reiko revealed her scheme to proclaim Old Dragon's reign over the city, which Old Dragon immediately refused, as he reminded the young girl that he wants no needless fights. Old Dragon was also surprised to see how Selianen City was lacking the bare minimum of defensive structures. Reiko, however, noticed that the town is actually protected by a magical barrier coming from Saint of the Water. Just as Old Dragon was relieved of what he heard, he was met with a psychic message that tells him that he's not welcome in Selianen. Old Dragon tried to explain the situation to the saint, but the latter persisted in threatening the Old Dragon. The call came to a close when Reiko disrupted the magical shield of the town, thus making Old Dragon able to enter. How did she do it? By simply infusing some of her magic into the water, which disturbed the saint a little. And by disturbing her I mean outright terrorizing her. Hearing this, Old Dragon was left just as terrified as the saint was, since this is a precursor for what was to come. While they were walking inside the city, Old Dragon was still thinking that he must find the saint to settle things down with her, as well as pledging her to restore the barrier before anything terrible happens to the city. Old Dragon also noticed how the townsfolk are looking at him and Reiko with suspicion, to which he addressed Reiko to not do anything reckless, especially since he was thinking that it might be a good opportunity for him to show to the townsfolk that he's a harmless old lizard. As such, he informed Reiko to help him hide his identity from townsfolk just as he previously instructed her. Reiko protested against it, but Old Dragon managed to get her to agree by portraying it as a prestigious necessity. Their plan consisted of trying to improve Old Dragon's image by looking like a circus dragon, which everyone can feel free to approach. Everyone was beginning to feel at ease towards their presence in the city, and one of them went as far as to introduce them to the statue of their deity, and how she founded this city from an inhabitable land to the pinnacle of human civilization, thanks to her ability to manipulate water and earth. Now that people trusted them enough to tell Old Dragon and Reiko of this story, everything's coming up Millhouse, or at least that's how things are supposed to be in an ideal world, where Reiko isn't in it, because she nearly messed everything up by insulting the Saint of the Water. Thankfully, Old Dragon prevented her from thwarting his plans as he switched the topic immediately. He also thwarted his plans by speaking, which he explained by pointing out that he merely imitates human speech. Now that the duo have a roof on top of their heads, Old Dragon began to search for the saint immediately. This time, he decided to keep Reiko in the hotel room for self-explanatory reasons. Reiko, however, somehow interpreted it as a part of a massive scheme he's plotting against the saint.
What?
Nevertheless, that didn't matter to Old Dragon, since Reiko will sit in the hotel room and refuse to take a step outside of it. Now he can search for the saint without having to worry about anything. After a while of back and forth, Old Dragon ended up arriving at a bar to quench his thirst for a second, albeit he was unaware that the saint was hiding in a cup of water there. Just as he approached a cup to drink, the saint pulled out and fell on the ground in a panic to run away, as she assumed that the panicking Old Dragon was looking for her in anger. She tried to hide in a stable, only to find out that old dragon has come after her once again, even though the poor loser is merely trying to quench his thirst. Seeing that he's failing in both drinking some water and meeting up with the saint, old dragon began to feel defeated. That evening, old dragon sat next to the river as he was trying to drink some water after reaching his limits, when some kids were happy to see him after hearing about him from their parents earlier today, so much so that a girl approached him with an apple. Old dragon was grateful for the kid's kindness, but the saint assumed that he might harm the young girl, so she came out of the river and stood in his way, claiming that she won't run away anymore. Realizing that this is indeed the saint, old dragon began to finally explain himself as a starving vegan dragon. Still, the saint got offended when old dragon asked politely if he could eat, even though he was clearly referring to the apple. To make matters worse for the old dragon, the saint asked the kids to go home, thus denying him the chance to eat. Still, this is finally the chance that old dragon needed to talk things out with the saint, who still believed that old dragon was trying to blackmail her with the kids. However, old dragon became too tired to even discuss anything. All he wants now would be to go back to the hotel room and rest, which made the saint conclude that old dragon will spare the city if she gets him back to the hotel room. On their way there, the saint was even more freaked out at admitting that she is indeed the saint, even though old dragon knew who she was anyway, to which he reminded her that she should reinstate the barrier that protects the city. Old dragon and the saint arrived back at the hotel, where the former thanked the latter for guiding him back there. Still, the saint was feeling uneasy towards old dragon, so much that she asked him to leave at first light. Although old dragon wanted to stay a few more days in the city, he relented to her request, as he reminded her to fix the barrier, to which the saint panicked as she left him. When he got in the hotel room, old dragon was surprised to see that Reiko was surrounded by a dark aura, which she claimed that she was trying to reach the highest level of obedience. Although he felt creeped out by Reiko, old dragon tried to ease the mood a little by telling her about the kids he found earlier, which made Reiko think that not interacting with these kids might have been the reason why she didn't ascend her obedience level to new heights. Although she would agree to anything her master tells her, Reiko disagreed with him this time, as she saw that these kids worship a demon that offended her master. To his credit, old dragon pointed out that Reiko is also worshipping him as an evil dragon, so that makes her no different than these kids if what she's saying is true, advising her to stop seeing the negative side of things before heading straight up to bed. As he was trying to sleep, he noticed that Reiko was sleeping next to him on the ground instead of the bed. Amidst that, a white dragon flew over town to conquer it instead of a certain failure of a dragon. As for the timing, he decided to conquer Selianan tomorrow by landing there in front of the entire city. The next morning, old dragon woke up to the saint entering the room. Just for Reiko to jump at her in a threatening manner for daring to disturb her master's rest, to which old dragon stopped her immediately. When asked about what she's up to, the saint answered that she wanted to give them breakfast, while trying to persuade them to leave town. Although a vegan on top of being a loser, old dragon was no fool, and he still saw through Saint's charade, calling her out as Saint even to show that out.
Do you think she's dumb?
Even though she tried to brush that off, despite shrinking in size after losing water from Reiko's assault earlier. Still, Saint was nice enough to bring them breakfast, so let's see what she got for them. Okay, that looks disgusting. It feels like she picked these veggies off the trash or something. I don't know how a saint can be this vile, to be honest. Although she got what she deserved for her terrible acts. Old dragon asked Reiko to stop picking needless fights just like this one, while adding that he cannot tolerate food to be wasted no matter what. As such, he concluded that Reiko must not use her power without his permission, unless it's for self-defense, until she becomes mature enough to figure out when and how to use it properly. Although his reasoning was sound, old dragon couldn't bear seeing Reiko being gloomy, so he lifted her morale a little by expressing that he's proud of her, to which Reiko began to smile again. To further improve her morale, old dragon brought up the matter of the children he met yesterday, just to encourage Reiko to make friends out of them. Indeed, Reiko obliged, even though old dragon didn't want her to take that as an order. As she left, old dragon went to search for where Saint is, when he found himself suddenly sibbling into what seems to be a trace of water on the floor. Of course, Reiko noticed that her master's aura had vanished abruptly, but she couldn't help but carry on with the order. As such, she went ahead to play with the kids, whom she found almost instantly. What struck her was the way these kids were calling out her master as cute little dragon.
What do you mean by that?
Which sounded as an offensive way to address her master. However, she also learned that the kids were excited to play with him, since he was friendly towards them, which made Reiko wonder about the ability of dragons to play with human children, which made her decide to tag along for now. Old Dragon was struggling to save his life from Saint, who was trying to sink him deep in her magical waters. After all, she didn't even believe that he's weak and useless. All he could do is hope for Ryuko to save him. Speaking of Ryuko, she was already searching for him when suddenly the white armored dragon from last night broke through the shield and got in town as he began to threaten the citizens. Not wanting to miss this opportunity, Ryuko became excited to play with this dragon instead. The armored dragon didn't think much of Ryuko's request since he considered it as a waste of time until she held his tail, insisting that she wants to play with him, only for the dragon to belittle humans, albeit he admitted that a part of him cannot turn down a challenge. As such, he decided to fight Ryuko, hoping that that will set an example for no one to mess with him. Little did he know that Ryuko had already lifted him off the ground and threw him away. Furious at his opponent's treachery, the evil dragon flew high away and began to gather energy to unleash at Ryuko, except that Ryuko was already behind him when he was about to unleash his load, which ended just like the previous attack. If that wasn't humiliating enough, Ryuko dragged him back from his tail and began to throw him time and again. Unexpectedly, these hits that the armored dragon was getting were also causing fractures in Saint's spell, until Old Dragon finally got out of it. However, Saint was not done yet, as she was still determined to get rid of him for good, which ended in an embarrassing loss, as the dark entity that gathered around Old Dragon saved him once again from drowning. In a brief moment, Old Dragon managed to conclude that Saint is actually one of the Demon Lord's army. Despite that, Saint remained fixated on binding Old Dragon in this space for eternity, even if that meant robbing Selianan City of what's been keeping it alive in the first place. Realizing the gravity of his situation, Old Dragon tried to use his skill a third time, only for the god of hunting to inform him that he's not going to help him a third time, and that he needs to calm down to figure out how to use his skill on his own. To make matters worse, Saint disrupted the call between Old Dragon and his master, thus preventing the former from learning what he should do to turn the table against Saint. What neither of them knew was that Saint was draining Old Dragon of his rejuvenating magic, which made his body expand to the point that he broke off the domain he was in. Realizing her defeat, Saint decided to oblige by returning to the demon army, or so she expected Old Dragon to ask her to do, because Saint is a god-forsaken bigot. Instead, Old Dragon encouraged her to stay in town for the sake of the citizens that believed in her, while making sure to warn her against using spells that would consume the entire town's water, since that's what the citizens' lives rely on. With their differences finally settled, Old Dragon decided to go look for Ryuko. Before he could do that, he turned around to ask Saint to not call him as Mr. Lizard in front of Ryuko, only to find that she got possessed by evil energy transported by a grasshopper from the armored dragon, which Old Dragon wasn't aware of what had been happening previously. Deep down, the low-rank monster kept on messing with Saint's brain, until she gave into evil, where she began to undo the years of progress that she made. Old Dragon tried to persuade her to get back to her old self. It would prove futile, as she claimed herself to be a water demon, and that she'll be bringing doom upon humanity from this point on, just so that no one will belittle her ever again. For starters, she attacked the villagers with mud, but they ended up thanking Saint for blessing them with fertile soil. Frustrated by seeing the citizens partying, Saint began to prepare for a massive attack to destroy the city, which got thwarted thanks to Ryuko's arrival. Of course, Ryuko came in at first call from her master, albeit she wasn't even aware that she bumped into one massive pile of fertile soil. Seeing no point in discussing how well behaved she was in his absence, Old Dragon went straight to search for Saint, who he found crying in frustration at how much of a she was now, just as much as she was when she joined the Demon Lord's army. Only then it became clear that her attempt to create this town was just a mere coincidence, as her initial intent was to harm some thirsty people using her waters and soil. As she tried to explain what she's been up to, people still worshipped her for blessing them with water and fertile soil. Eventually, the city of Selianan grew and expanded from nothing, which made Saint now stuck in a predicament. What is she exactly? Is she a savior saint for the citizens of this city, or a demon of the Demon Lord's army just like how she was meant to be? Understandably, Old Dragon was understanding of her crisis, but he was also aware that she never was a bad person from the get-go. Before Old Dragon could say a word, one of the kids from earlier came in, as she noticed that Old Dragon grew much bigger and that Saint was crying, even though she didn't know who she was. As such, the girl said that Saint have no reason to cry, because their holy saint has blessed them with fertile soil once again. Ironically, Saint didn't think that people were happy for being blessed by her skill, but were sarcastic towards her terrible use of evil magic. Much to Old Dragon and Ryaiko's confusion, Ryaiko tried to use this opportunity to get her overlord to seize power of Selianen. But Old Dragon brushed off the idea as he reminded her that seeing the smile on other people's faces has been her ultimate goal. Although Old Dragon admitted that he may not be the most reliable person to help, he made it clear that what counts is not who she is, but who she wants to be. While patting Saint's head, the parasitic monster got into Old Dragon to begin a new round of messing with his brain. Initially, Old Dragon assumed that the dark thoughts he was hearing were coming from being stressed out. Amidst that, the kids were playing some kind of a roleplay defeating the demon lord and such, only for Ryaiko to conclude that Old Dragon wanted to teach her that these kids are some dumb greenhorns that aren't worth interacting with her master, especially that they already worship someone as incompetent as Saint. Ryaiko also thought that it'd be best if they leave town, especially after causing a great deal of trouble already. Although Old Dragon opposed the idea initially, he decided to agree to it, as he thought that Saint no longer required their help. As such, he concluded that they must sneak out of town. While they were doing so, Saint caught them up, expressing her desire to not let them leave, since the town will be hosting a festival to worship her, and as thanks and apology for the two, Saint wanted to invite them to it. Ryaiko opposed it, but Old Dragon gladly accepted the invitation, much to Saint's overjoyment. What Old Dragon didn't know, however, is that he might have given some extra time for the demon that possessed him to figure out where his dark side is hidden. Speaking of evil, the armored dragon turned out to have an inner conflict after being humiliated by a young girl. Despite how funny this scene was, the adventurer that came from the guild noticed that there's something horribly wrong going on, which is why he needs to report it to the guild at once. Elsewhere that night, Lai was carrying a massive boulder with Alliant atop it. Seeing that a lot of people were gathering at the city's gate, Alliant asked her disciple to stop. When she got to see what the commotion there was all about, she found a poster about the shocking discovery of an evil dragon in Selianen. To which Lai got too worked up about it, unlike his well-mannered master, who saw that this poster is way too vague. As such, she ordered Lai to get back to training, since it'll be pointless to stop halfway on his training to become stronger to save Ryaiko. However, in the back of her head, Alliant was having questions about what's really going on in Selianen. As such, she decided to go and check what's going on her own. Old Dragon and Ryaiko were having fun at the festival, with the light mood in the city, people smiling, sweets and candies everywhere, which got Ryaiko to be drooling over them, before her stomach began growling like your average metal vocalist. Oh, Old Dragon also turned out to be just as hungry, since he couldn't eat grass in a while by now. His salvation came out when he noticed some sheeps eating grass behind the scene, so he decided to sneak out of the festival for a second to enjoy a good meal. However, his hopes and dreams came crashing down when he discovered that the sheeps had finished eating their meal and left nothing. Or so he thought, as he saw the girl that tried to offer him an apple the other day carrying lots of grass with her. Seeing that Old Dragon was hungry, she fed him the grass she had. Old Dragon couldn't restrain himself as long as Ryaiko doesn't see him. Fortunately for Old Dragon, Ryaiko didn't even believe that someone is mistreating the mighty evil dragon as a sheep, so she turned a blind eye and kept on walking, much to Old Dragon's luck. What he wasn't lucky about though was that the sheeps began to gather around the girl to give them grass. To make matters worse, the ghost that possessed him spotted a weakness in him and began to chastise Old Dragon to unleash his dark side, which turned out to be that he used to steal apples off of trees before beginning to fight with the sheeps over grass. When he got back to his old self, Old Dragon learned about the presence of another big dragon outside the city that hasn't eaten anything yet. The next morning, Old Dragon arrived to see the sorry state of the armored dragon, to which he went to discuss things with him after getting the young girl to go back home. Before he could mention his will to bring Ryaiko to apologize, Old Dragon was frightened to see that the armored one was about to attack him, only to end up being hugged while being asked to play with him.
What?
It turned out that Ryaiko have caused the armored dragon a great deal of. What he didn't know was that the low-tier monster have passed from Old Dragon to the schizophrenic one to destroy his innocent self and take over instead, thus turning the evil yet noble armored dragon into a despicable evil one that nearly got rid of Old Dragon. Seeing how hopelessly horrible his situation is, Old Dragon did what he does best, calling out Ryaiko to do all the dirty work for him.
何必非要攻击老夫？
Since he was the one in control, the Dark Ghost identified Ryuko as the one that wiped the floor using Armored Dragon, so he tried to attack her time and time again. But to no avail, as Ryuko managed to dodge all of her enemies' attacks with ease. Heck, she even went as far as to throw him on the ground once again. This time, however, the Dark Ghost passed on from Armored Dragon to possess Ryuko instead. Just as he tried to possess Ryuko, he found out that the girl's darkness was so massive that it devoured the ghost. This led to Ryuko's darkness spiraling out of control, leaving a massive hole in the ground. Her aura got Alliant and Saint alarmed to what's happening. Fortunately for Old Dragon, Alliant arrived just in time to save him from being consumed by Ryuko's energy. For Ryuko, she kept on trying to resist the darkness, but in the end, it would all be for naught as darkness overpowered her and turned Ryuko into a demon that is threatening Saint just because. If that didn't freak Saint out enough, Alliant assumed that Saint knew what she was doing and intentionally provoked Ryuko outside the city for the sake of protecting her city, much to Saint's dismay, since none of that was true. Seeing that some of the villagers were endangered because of Ryuko now, Alliant intervened just in time to protect them. Now with all the villagers leaving the scene, Alliant, Old Dragon, and Saint thought of a way to fight this behemoth. This led them to the genius idea of running away. Old Dragon tried to think of a way to save the girl, but Alliant reminded him that this would be the perfect chance he's been looking for to abandon Ryuko. After a brief moment of self-reflection, Old Dragon finally made up his mind on saving Ryuko. He stood briefly in front of Ryuko, who was still preparing for a massive attack. Unable to leave her alone, Old Dragon began to run towards Ryuko, who had unleashed the massive attack she was making. After 5,000 years of holding back, Old Dragon finally decided to not escape. Although he took the brunt of the attack, he's still pretty much unharmed. But Ryuko still didn't stop from showing off her bloodthirst. Fortunately for him, Alliant seemed to figure out a solution to save Ryuko, thanks to his previous attempt earlier. Alliant figured that despite her transformation, Ryuko still can't afford to hurt the dragon that she has chosen to believe in. If they can capitalize on this soft spot in her heart, Alliant decided to get Old Dragon to get past her attacks so he can trigger a chain reaction. Once they began to execute the plan, Old Dragon seemed to be able to get through the attack, but not get anywhere near close enough to Ryuko, which made Alliant have food for thought to make the plan work. She considered involving a way to sacrifice Saint for the sake of the plan to work. But Saint opposed that. However, they have to make up their minds as they're running out of time. As such, Old Dragon came up with a plan that involved himself coming back to his original size. Seeing that Old Dragon was tied up by Saint's water, Ryuko got to attack her instantly, only to find herself engaged in melee with Alliant. This kept on going until Old Dragon got his size back, before telling Alliant to move somewhere remote to proceed with his plan. Now that everything is set in place, Old Dragon used Armored Dragon's wings as a sling to be thrown directly towards Ryuko. The plan worked, as Old Dragon pierced through Ryuko's attack and got to wake her up. In her dream, Ryuko kept on remembering how people used to think of her as a monster for causing trouble for them and her father. Her only source of hope was her father, who assured her that he was aware of her will to help, while giving her a ribbon before passing away. When she woke up, Ryuko found Old Dragon worried about her well-being. Although she was worried that the town got hurt, just like Old Dragon, Saint assured them both that the town center isn't destroyed, which means that they can still host the festival. Although this sounded weird for Old Dragon, Saint assured them that nothing in the world could beat the optimism of Selianen's townsfolk. With that out of the way, Old Dragon finally got to ask Ryuko to take it easy at the festival, which she agreed to, even though she was still willing to get her master to take over town. An offer that Old Dragon promptly refused. Once they were done with helping in the reconstruction effort, Old Dragon, Ryuko, Alliant, and Saint finally began to enjoy this moment of genuine peace and tranquility in the festival. That concludes the anime recap. As always, if you enjoyed, let me know down below and I'm out.